Hey, Coupley Fit fam. Welcome to another episode of the Coupley Fit podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about what is on most people's minds right now, and that's mental health. Although it is Mental Health Awareness Month, we wanted to dive a little deeper into what is mental health, how do I know if I'm struggling with it, and then also what are some areas of opportunity where I can get some help. But before we get started, I just wanted to shout out a disclaimer that we are not mental health professionals. We do have some experience with mental health, being in the health and wellness space, but we are not professionals. If you feel like you need help coping, or if you feel like you need help with your mental health because you're struggling, we do ask that you please seek professional help. We will give you some areas of opportunity to receive that help at the end of the episode, so stay tuned for that. But we want to make sure we have that disclaimer because mental health is a sensitive subject.
No, it's a sensitive subject, and I feel like not a lot of people talk about it or about their experiences or struggles with mental health, and it's unfortunate, but sometimes you just see the end result, right? Whether that's someone having an outburst or being like, dang, are they okay? And it's like now they need to go get help versus the journey of like, I'm actually seeking therapy or I'm going through different practices to help with my mental health.
And to your point, I think it's taking it back to preventative care. And we don't want, similar to what we talk about with physical health, we don't want to have the ailment, go to the doctor, and they say that we're so much further along. And if we would have caught this earlier, we could have made some changes to like that chronic disease. So I think it's the same thing when it comes to our mental health as well. We want to prevent that outburst or prevent the anxiety, depression that may be coming on so that we can continue to, feel better.
And mental health is so different than the physical at times because people will think from a physical standpoint, oh, well, that person looks great. Correct. Or physically, like they look like they have it going on. But mental health can be one of those things where it doesn't matter how much money you have, what car you drive, what it looks like from the outside, mentally or in your own head, things could be totally different than what the optics look like.
Absolutely. So I think most people are probably thinking to themselves, okay, we hear mental health, but what does that mean? What is mental health? So we wanted to give you just a quick overview of some information that we found, which mental health encompasses an individual's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It influences how we think, feel, and act. It also affects our ability to cope with stress, to relate to others, and to make choices, but it helps us to realize our own potential, how to work productively and fruitfully, and how to contribute to the community. So I saw an interesting example on social media about, how we can look at mental health. And I saw that it's similar to your internal weather system. So we see, you're with weather systems, there's highs and there's lows, there's bright days, there's rainy days. But how can we regulate our internal weather system? I thought that was so interesting. And I thought it also brought it down from being this almost ambiguous, what is mental health, to saying, okay, internal weather system, we see the weather every day. That's something that every person can relate to. Yeah. And that can make it a little bit easier for you to be able to maybe recognize your own mental health.
And it does simplify it as well because when you think about mental health like the weather in that example, if there's a storm, storms come, right? We have rainy days. Sometimes it's not raining, but it's cloudy.
Okay.
You don't know what's going to happen, something unexpected, right? You don't want a tornado or a tsunami, right, to come. But sometimes mental health, you feel like, man, am I getting attacked? Or did something come out of nowhere that I didn't anticipate, whether that was professionally with business or personally with family or with your spouse or significant other, or just something that you've been dealing with in your life, maybe from childhood or things like that. And I know we've both had a lot of experiences that people have no idea that we've gone through, both individually and together, that really took a lot of work to get through, to overcome, and to stay mentally positive. Sometimes people think like, man, you guys are always positive. You're always optimistic. It's like, it's easy. And it's like, no, you have to make a choice every day. We don't just wake up and we're like, today is sunny, even if it's raining. Doesn't work like that.
You're so right. I think that's a great way to also start talking about some statistics, right? Like, okay, yes, we're talking about mental health. We have an idea of what it is, but what are some statistics specifically when it comes to America? Now, before we dive in, I do want to give just another quick disclaimer about you're going to hear me say mental illness. And so I want to give a little bit more insight into that. So mental illness is, disorders that significantly affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. So it can be things like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, addictive disorders. So when you hear these stats that are coming up, that's what I'm going to be mentioning or that's what I want you to more so think about when I say mental illness. So the first stat that I have is 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness in any given year. That's significant. I mean, if you line people up, or if you're around 5 people right now, there's one person around you that has struggled this year.
Right. And when you think about lining up a row of 5 people, each person can look differently, and you don't know who is dead. And that's what's so different with mental illness. Like, if someone's limping, like, oh, maybe they hurt their foot or they hurt their leg, and like, I can go and help them or ask if they need help. But when it's mental health, you have no idea. There can be no signs, no signals, nothing that someone gives off. But then sometimes it's tragedy that strikes, or unfortunate news, and you realize, man, they were really struggling with something behind the scenes this entire time, and we didn't even know.
You're absolutely correct. And we're going to go into some signs here later in the episode so that you also, as maybe someone's support system, can see some of the signs in your significant other or just the people that are around you, and be able to either talk to them and sit down with them and have conversations that will allow somebody to be vulnerable about where they are in their space. Yeah. But one thing I also saw, we all went through the pandemic worldwide, and it has significantly impacted our mental health. So when we do go back to that 1 in 5 U.S. adults that experience mental illness in any given year, think about the pandemic. Yeah. We can all, as soon as you hear pandemic, all of us can go back to a moment where we felt maybe some depression, maybe some anxiety, maybe some addictive behaviors. The alcohol and drugs were on the rise during that time. And so it's interesting to hear that we are all going through it. And I think that's something we're going to notice as we continue throughout the episode, is we all are going to go through something. And how can we see if we're the ones struggling with it? What are the signs? And then what are some ways that we're going to be able to help?
And some with the pandemic too, that I think impacted so many people, was that level of isolation. Like, people didn't realize, and I know there's some really key stats around isolation and not being able to interact, engage, be around other people. But when you're just by yourself and you're locked in,
single friends were struggling.
And even single friends, but then the couples, got to talk about the fact that there was a lot of couples during the pandemic that hadn't spent that one-on-one time together.
It
was like, hold on.
Ooh, do I like you?
I don't really like you. That's unfortunate that people have to deal with that, because you find out when you're really together. Because so many times, if we're working, we're vacationing, we're on different schedules and different routines. So we're really not having to see, are we growing together and on the same page? And I think that made a big difference too for both couples and individuals, of like, how many people were in a relationship but realized that I was isolated and by myself, although I'm in a
relationship.
Come on.
That ain't no but a word. You're absolutely correct. So next stat, 46% of Americans will meet the criteria for a diagnosable mental health condition at some point in their lives. 46% of Americans. That's a significant, we're talking, again, if you see 2 people in front of you.
1 out of 2.
One out of 2.
And how many people, to your point, are in denial? Because I just think about how many people are like, I'm not going to the doctor just for physical, like, you feel something hurting you, but you won't go to the doctor because you want to tough it out, or because you are afraid of what the doctor might say. That's when it comes to a physical ailment that is hurting. Think about when it's mental. And there's the stereotypes, or there's the, negative connotation with, I'm going to go in and ask for help or get an assessment to see, like, are these emotions or thoughts okay? And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that.
I think you're absolutely correct, because interesting enough, half of the people will develop the conditions by the age of 14. Oof. By the age of 14. And, I think we'll talk a little bit later about some of our journeys with our mental health. But by the age of 14, like I've mentioned before in a previous episode, I'm a Big Brothers Big Sisters mentor, and she's 14.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing how she's speaking. And during this time, peers are the ones that are essentially teaching you when it comes to developmental psychology. And so if your peers are anxious, if they're depressed, if they are also seeing things at home that they're then taking into school, some of the things that she's told me, my jaw has dropped to the ground. I cannot believe that some of these kids are saying these things. And sometimes they don't know what they're saying, but there's other times where it's just like, just the fact that that came out of your mouth and someone else is hearing it, they may internalize that. And now this turns into, I am hyper anxious, like I have a lot of anxiety, I'm maybe even depressed, I'm having these addictive behaviors, and I don't necessarily know why. But at the age of 14, that's a critical stage. Typically you're just starting high school, like you're a freshman in high school. And we can think back to when we were freshmen in high school. It's such an awkward time, depending on puberty, and then also your environment. It's just you're trying to figure out so much at one time. And if you don't have the proper influences, that can absolutely affect your mental health.
Yeah, and you're young and impressionable, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, at that age, you're young, you're impressionable, you're trying to find your footing and your way. But so often people forget that the power of life and death is in the tongue. So the things that you say can truly have someone believing more in themselves or believing less in themselves, right? Like I believe there's some stats around, for every negative thing that you hear, you have to hear like 9 or 10 positive things to offset it. So just when we think about that, whether we're talking to our kids or to our friends or to even a classmate or a colleague, like speak positive into someone, but also speak positive to yourself. Because if we're talking negative or we're our hardest critic, which I know we all can be at times, like who's letting yourself out of that match of I've got to be better, or I can't give myself grace, or I can't allow myself to think about maybe the things that I'm struggling or working through, which is very real. Everybody's going through that.
Yes. And I mean, the stats say it. Everyone is going through it. And so now when we talk about the anxiety, I think that is something that has absolutely been on the rise, especially with social media coming out. We both started social media, it was MySpace back in the day, but we were in high school, maybe 8th grade, right? Like when that started. So we had, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. I said, man, the glory days of having your Nokia phone where you only have Snake, you don't have access to the internet. And it's just it's something that we don't see. Everybody is on their phones. And if we're talking addictive behaviors, how many people are addicted to their phones?
Yeah, I mean, it can be very real. And there's a time where for work, you had to drive into the office, clock in, start work. But now a lot of people are working remote, right? Since the pandemic. So now your work is on your phone. I know I can be guilty of it where it's way past clock out hours and I'm like looking at notifications, or I'm checking that email, or I see, even sometimes it's just the name of someone. It's like, oh, that might be serious, or I got to check that. And that can give you anxiety.
Of course.
Like just feeling like you got to be on, or feeling like you have to always check notifications and things like that. So being able to create space and give yourself that opportunity to disconnect from just the phone or from social media makes a big difference too.
Absolutely. And if you haven't checked out our previous episode, we were talking, or a couple of episodes ago, we were talking about digital detox. And, for us, that's on Sundays, the Lord's Day, where we do take that time off of our phones. And, it's not, we're completely neglecting, if it's an important call or if it's a message from mom, right? We're going to hit you back. But just taking that time for yourself to be able to let your cortisol levels, which are your stress hormones, be able to come down.
And just something I was going to add to that too. Like, I feel like with iPhone, I just appreciate having the work,
the notification,
or the notification to do not disturb. And it's like you can allow calls from friends, family, certain people, right?
Your favorite list, I believe it is.
Your favorites, but to be able to not get, because I mean, man, for me, and I know you too, getting the notifications and you're getting alerts, and then you get the spam calls and different things. It's just like, man, why is it? Or and if you have,
it's constant.
A watch, an Apple Watch, or something else for notifications, it's like my watch is ringing, my phone is ringing, things are lighting up.
I'm getting anxiety just thinking about it.
Right. So how do we step away from that? And it's great to have technology, but it shows that we can be more advanced from a technology standpoint or more accessible from social media to see what people are doing, but also more disconnected than ever because it's
Exactly.
less one-on-one
Yes.
interactions with people in
Yes.
real time.
Yes. And interesting, going back to that 14-year-old age, right? One thing that we're hearing is that we are in an epidemic of loneliness for the
Yeah.
younger generations. To your point, although we are as connected as ever, we are the most disconnected. It's to the point now where kids almost don't even know how to interact with each other unless it's through the phones, unless it's through social media. Like the texting, kids go crazy. You know, they're like, hey, are you on this game? Are you doing this? And not having an actual conversation with each other. And that's very concerning. So now, as we've been talking about anxiety, 42.5 million U.S. adults have anxiety disorders, making it one of the most common mental illnesses. And quickly, I want to go back to the definition of mental illness: disorders that significantly affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. So just like we were talking about with the phones, instantly, as you were describing it, I felt kind of my heart rate fluttering.
Yeah.
I felt my palms getting a little bit sweaty. I felt a little bit overwhelmed because it brings that anxiety on where you don't know how to disconnect. I feel like a lot of people are like, well, how do I actually do that? Especially if I am a professional. What are some ways that I can do that and still be able to, you know, be in both worlds, right? Of maybe it's family time and you need to make sure that you're present with your family, but then, you know, work, if you are, you know, a professional or C-level, whatever that looks like for you, you still are able to not neglect your responsibilities there as well.
And to that point of being present, one of the things that I know we noticed a big difference between the U.S. and
Europe.
traveling in Europe and other countries is like at the table when you sit down.
Yes.
In the
You're
States and the
absolutely
U.S., it's like everybody's on their
Everybody's
phones.
on their phone and tablets.
Everybody's at their tablet. Or if people aren't on their phone or tablet,
They're
they're
not talking to each other.
I've got nothing to say
I have
to you.
nothing to say to you. Just looking around.
Staring.
Staring.
Like, think about being out to eat. It's a problem.
Yes.
If you're out to eat and you're talking to your waiter or waitress more than you're talking to your date or your spouse.
Listen.
on.
And we have so many stories, which we're
on.
going to have an episode talking just being in the service industry. You and I were in the service industry for 15 years combined.
Yeah.
The amount of times that I used to see parents just throw a tablet at their kids with the, you know, the like the headphone
Headphones.
sets that,
Boop.
yeah. And then when they're ready to order, they're asking their kids to take their headphones off and they're throwing a fit.
Don't you dare take these headphones.
Don't you dare take my headphone set off. And then also to your point of couples that are supposed to be quote unquote on date night and they're not talking to each other, they're looking around, and guess what? It then becomes, we're going to now look around and we're going to gossip about other people because that's how we then also are maybe connecting, but that's not, we're not going to be talking about like the root of why we're not talking to each other.
Yeah.
Oh no, we're not going to do that. We're going to then talk about other people. And we were talking about gossip culture before this because we were shocked at a couple of things that we've seen
No, but to
and
your
heard.
but to your point on it, when it comes to that gossip culture, and that makes it easier, right? It's easier to watch reality TV. And
It's an escape.
That's what it's an
escape.
escape, and it's easier to see this extreme of like, oh man, well they're not talking to each other at all, or it's actually getting even more negative, right, on reality TV, or the example that you're watching in a restaurant.
Yeah,
But
Real
it's like,
Housewives.
you feel me? But what about us engaging and having those conversations at the table? And I think making it the standard to not be on the phone or not be at your device, to have some thought starters or some questions to just open up that dialogue, that's such a difference maker. Because I think back to when, you know, I was under that age of 14 and some of the biggest mental health struggles that I had, a lot of it was just because I felt like I didn't have a safe space
Absolutely.
to express how I was feeling, express the things that were happening. You know, we grew up, we talk about this, but I grew up in an era and the household was like, you know, children speak when they're spoken to.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, you know, I'll ask you a question and you respond versus you just speaking what's on your heart. And
Your feelings don't matter.
Correct.
Absolutely. And we'll dive a little deeper into that story here in the episode. But I want to give this last stat because I think this is incredibly impactful of when we think about mental health, but then also, again, this is something that is common and realizing that the more that we do talk about mental health and the more that we do express these stats, people are going to realize, again, commonality, right? We live in a world right now where everything is division, especially here in the United States. And so now what can we bring together for everyone that makes it seem like, okay, we have something in common? So in 2024, an estimated 57.8 million adults had a mental illness, but only 43% received mental health care. Now, I want to take this a step further because, again, you hear 57.8 million, but let's go to an NFL stadium, right? If you have ever been to a game before, or maybe even a graduation sometimes are held at NFL stadiums. Massive. An average NFL stadium holds 70,000 people. It will take 829 stadiums filled to reach that 57.8 million people. I'm almost lost for words. That is how many adults have had a mental illness, but only 43% have received mental health care.
So if I'm doing the math correctly, that's 800 plus stadiums, but basically 400 or 300 of those stadiums that are filled are on like basically only 300 are actually getting help. Correct. The other half, the other 400 or 500 stadiums are just people that are struggling with the mental health issue or illness, but it's either undiagnosed or they haven't gotten help. But that's what we see so often and it's a reminder to not judge or to seek to understand before you judge, because sometimes you're seeing somebody doing something or acting out or behaving, whether it's a child or an adult, and we think, man, that person's crazy. And we use that word so often. Man, that's crazy. They crazy. But the reality is they might actually have a mental illness or need mental help. And I think it's such a taboo where some people will say crazy or say they have a mental health issue and they haven't been diagnosed, or someone hasn't been either treated or diagnosed for it, and it can get lost in translation. But people do, to your point with the stats, people need help.
People need help, and that's what those stats are telling us it's not just, we're not talking hundreds, even thousands of people. We're talking millions of people that need some sort of help. And so now, as we've been talking about some of these incredible stats, you at home might be thinking, okay, well, how do I know if I'm struggling with my mental health? And so if you're seeing persistent changes in your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that impact your ability to function daily. So I know for me, my anxiety, that is something that is also generational as well. I have people in my family that struggle with anxiety, and I see it even if it's just like a tapping of the foot, it's a tapping of the fingers, it's an anxiousness that I see. And then I started noticing that in myself. And then once I, in certain periods of my life, I noted that my anxiety would just be higher. And sometimes the anxiety just gets higher just from the amount of notifications you were talking about on your phone, where I have now had to make some changes. You can mute notifications. I will go through probably once every 2 or 3 hours and just delete the notifications that I don't need to respond to, so that I'm not looking at my phone and just scrolling through the notifications that I have. So then taking that a step further, if you see changes in your mood, your sleep, appetite, energy levels, or behaviors that are persistent for more than 2 weeks, and they interfere with your work, school, relationships, or daily activities, that's when I read online that you should receive some professional help. And I think once we said the 2 weeks, when I read that, I said, there's been plenty of times in my life that there's been some sort of thought, feeling, or behavior that's been daily that has affected me for more than 2 weeks. Absolutely. But did I go and get care for it? No. But I also didn't know that that's considered struggling with your mental health. So we hope that this helps somebody in this space to realize that you may be struggling with your mental health, and that it's also okay to not be okay and to seek that professional help.
100%. And I also think about in those moments, or flashing back to when you were in that situation, or even when I was, who are the people that you can go and talk to, right? Where are the trusted resources, whether that's a parent or a friend or a family member, or in an ideal situation, if you can, speaking to a professional, right? Whether that's
Absolutely.
if you have a resource at school, a health
Right.
counselor, or, a doctor, or, a therapist that you can go to, which I know a lot of people don't necessarily have access or resources. And it's like, if I do see that I'm dealing with something for 2 weeks, who do I talk to?
Absolutely. And stay tuned until the end of the episode. We will give you all some tips and also some organizations that you can reach out to receive that help. So now it's okay. I know that I'm struggling, but maybe what are some more potential signs that maybe me as a family member or someone that I see that I care about may be struggling with their mental health. So more signs are, persistent sadness and hopelessness, which you and I have talked about that in a previous episode where we were talking about struggling with mental health and how we felt that hopelessness feeling.
Yeah.
You see increased anxiety and worriness. There's thoughts of self-harm. You withdraw from social activities, which I know for me, that's one of my ways to cope, was pulling away from social activities. Also, increased irritability and anger, excessive guilt or shame, changes in your personal hygiene, which I quickly just want to mention a viral clip. I believe it was on TikTok of a woman who did not leave her bed for weeks. And you just saw or you couldn't even see the carpet because that's how much trash, clothes, feces.
Oh boy.
She had a dog, so feces, things like that. She had a husband too, and her husband was actually recording her. He's like, "Why aren't you getting up? Why are you so lazy? Why are you not doing these things?" And she could just tell she hasn't moved from that spot on her bed in weeks. You could tell. But that's another way of seeing that somebody is struggling with their mental health. If you see increased risky behavior, and then if you also see changes in personality as well.
Yeah, man, and I think how you respond to seeing these signs really matters. Because I'm just thinking about if someone is
Absolutely.
struggling with, like, clearly those are all signs of struggle, right? Or self-loathing, or just that, there's something happening in that window. But is the response to it your partner recording you and putting on social media, or is it,
Right.
let me get you help? Let's maybe call someone, or let's maybe have a phone call or facilitate an opportunity to get you to, like, speak to somebody and get some help. And so I think how we can support somebody that's going through it is a really key part, because we
Absolutely.
all need help and need those passion partners to assist. And I know we've both had some situations. One thing that immediately came to my mind as you were saying, like, that 2 week window, I remember being in college, my freshman year, and we were having a terrible season, like literally bad season. I was supposed to be playing. I'm redshirting because I hurt my knee. I'm in Seattle, and it's going through that gloomy season, so it's like gloomy and all those things. And I remember going through this period where, like, I'm wearing all black clothes. I'm like wearing my hood up. I'm not really like talking to
Hoodie
people,
Mellow.
hoodie mellow vibes, right? And it's like that's not my natural energy,
Correct.
but I felt like I was in this like kind of down, gloom and doom
It's
state,
like a fog.
a fog, and
Yeah.
like I was matching that energy. I'm sitting in the back, kind of back of class. I'm not really engaged. I'm just kind of going through the motions and just trying to get through and to be able to go back to like my dorm and like be inside, right? Like eat and just that was it. And so I realized, like, in that example too, where you can have different seasons where you're going through a struggle or a slump, and that's a great time. I wish I would have known then what I know now, to talk to somebody versus it lasting or going through a longer period of um, depression or sadness or just struggle because you're going through it by yourself.
You're absolutely correct. And I'm glad that you shared that story, and I appreciate you sharing that because I feel like that will also give people insight too into, again, what does that look like? Like, what does struggling with your mental health look like? And there were a couple of things that we mentioned before on the signs, right? Where, there were some changes in your personality. There were potentially like increased irritability and anger.
Oh yeah, I used to also like to that moment like Hoodie Mellow, but I used to sit by myself. It's like me,
So
my roommate,
isolation, that's on here.
isolate. Everybody's eating inside in like the team eating area. We used to sit like sit outside,
Mm-hmm.
just being again isolating myself, but not realizing how much mental health had to do with that. Versus it's just a swinging mood, or I'm just like feeling like this right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And this takes me back instantly to probably when I was struggling with my mental health the most. And that was in middle school. You know, I just moved from Boston, Massachusetts to Goodyear, Arizona.
Are you in witness protection?
When I say Goodyear and I say where I live, people ask me, were you guys in WITSEC, Witness Protection? It was an extremely rural town. You know, there were 23 black students at
Sheesh.
my high
Out of how many?
school.
23 out of how many?
Out of, I mean, it was a newer school because, again, this is a very rural area. The school was maybe a year or two. Well, by the time I was like at school,
Yeah.
we just had our first graduating class. So again, you're talking very small town, you're talking very rural, you know, one gas station.
Oof.
There's one, the supermarket was 20 minutes away.
Oof.
We used to say we were going down the hill. That was the reference that we used to use. And I remember I'm coming from such a diverse,
Yeah.
you know, not only background, but then also environment where I'm in Massachusetts and then I'm coming to a very rural, almost isolated, you know, community. And I remember the first day of school, I bawled my eyes out. I couldn't believe I was here. I didn't see anybody that looked like me. I was just in a state of, this can't be real. Like, this can't be life. And then as I was going through school, through middle school and things like that, I had a lot of hopelessness. I was thinking to myself, I'm never going to get out of here. I don't know what it looks like on the other side of this storm right now, and I'm in it. And I remember I used to self-isolate to cope, which now I realize that's literally one of the worst things that you can do is to self-isolate. I used to also be very angry. I used to be tired all the time. The fatigue would set in, and I didn't necessarily, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to get help. I also didn't feel like I was in a family unit that would allow me to have a safe space to tell somebody these feelings. And so I just felt alone. I felt by myself. There's nobody to talk to. It's only me. And I have to get through this, but I don't know how. I'm in middle school. I don't have the resources. Mental health back in, this was what, early 2000s? That was not even mentioned. It wasn't talked about almost at all like it is now. And so I remember as soon as we started talking about mental health, my mind instantly went back to that. And I was not myself. Like, my personality was not necessarily myself. And I just remember it was such a struggle, but I just didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to or express how I was feeling.
And you know, something that you mentioned there, because I think back to the stat you talked about of that 14 years old and
Yes.
under being like a key
I was
age
14.
in middle school. And I think back, my biggest struggles, like you said, were also under that 14 age range where you feel like, man, these are such big emotions.
Yes.
And for me, I was a little bit of a different student than maybe the average. Like, I would have done much better, like being hands-on. Like, I enjoyed recess, lunch, like school ending versus like being in class. I'm like looking at the clock. I used to feel like the walls are shrinking.
Yeah, that's
palms are sweaty and things like that. But it was just me wanting to like kind of thinking a little bit differently, and my approach is a little bit different. But how teachers and schools responded to that, especially when I was in middle school, 6th, 7th grade, being at a private school, at a church, in right outside of Detroit. But
Can you share more of that story?
yeah, so basically, you know, I'm a new student at a grade coming in 6th grade, at a school, FCA. It was at a huge, like at a mega church, Word of Faith, right outside of Detroit in Southfield. And I remember my parents being so excited that I got into the school. Look, thank you, Jesus. Pulled the car over. Thank you, Jesus. He's got to the school. It's going to be so great. You know, uniforms, all of the things, good school. It was predominantly black, like all black, which was
Very different experience.
very
than what I
different
had.
experience than what you had. But what I realized was that my class that I was coming into, everybody had been together from K-5 all the way through middle school. So I'm coming in as the outsider, as the new person that doesn't know the flow and how the school operates. And it was like a little bit military in some ways on how they wanted you to like be. They say jump, you say how high. You're not talking back. You're not, they could hit you with the ruler and like things like that. And for me, I wasn't that kid. I was the kid that was asking second, third level questions, things that might have seemed like I was trying to be funny or like do more talking. It was just me being myself. But how that was responded to is like, this kid is a troublemaker. He wants to be the class clown. We're going to kick him out of class. I remember my mental health getting so bad to get out of class. I used to staple my fingers, as a kid, staple my finger, tell the teacher that I stapled my finger on accident just to go down to the nurse's office. I walked the halls it would get me out for like an hour or so. But like thinking about how bad that was and like self-harm is like obviously really bad. But not realizing like what's happening, why are these behaviors happening? And I remember it got to the point where I'm getting in trouble. I'm getting, spanked, beat at home for my behaviors at school. And then I'm at school and they used to like do things like put me down in the lost and found.
That's what I wanted you to.
Yeah, I'll never forget they put me down in the lost and found. It's dark. It's like the basement of the church basically. And my day is spent me just sorting the lost and found. They used to face my desk towards the wall. I used to eat lunch by myself, facing the wall, like things like that aren't good for a kid because mentally, it made me definitely feel by myself, but also it made me act out. So when people talk about like,
Exactly.
You kind of put someone in a cage, whether it's a pet or whatever, and it's like, man, you put that, put someone in a cage or like lock them in somewhere. And now when they get out, they're acting out. How do you think I acted when I'm not in that situation or when I come home? And so I think about that because that was definitely my biggest like struggle time mental health wise was in that middle school time. And it was so pivotal. I'm just grateful that I overcame it and didn't succumb to like greater, issues.
So I know for both of us during that time where we were struggling the most, we've talked about this in a previous episode, but we did struggle with, suicidal ideations as well during that time. And, we've talked about what that looked like for both of us in the sense of, again, the hopelessness was so strong for both of us. I literally remember I used to dream about how can I run away? How can I get out of this situation? I have nobody to call. Like, okay, I'm just going to pack up this bag with these items. I need to have food. I need to have water. It's going to take me to get from here down the hill. It's going to take me this amount of time. And then how am I going to get from the hill to the freeway to try to get picked up? Like I used to think about that being in middle school, but those are, it's hard to talk about even though we're on the other end of it. Like we've gone through that storm, we see the rainbow, but I know two things for me. So number one, I know that genetically depression runs in my family as well. So anxiety and depression, which both fall under that, mental illness or, mental health. And not even 2 years ago, I was going through a spout of depression. I just lost my grandmother unexpectedly. We had a lot of things also happening personally. I'm changing personally. And there were, I'm getting bombarded with a lot of maybe feelings, behaviors, emotions that I was avoiding. And that's also where I realized, and talked about in therapy that I have, in some cases, avoidant behavior, which can also lead to some of those mental health struggles. And so also realizing like depression is not something that, it's more common than you think. I know for me, just some signs that I knew that I was in it was I'm not motivated for the day. I was holding on to a lot of inflammation in my body. I'm apathetic. I don't really have care. I can't see the next day really. I'm just going through the motions. It's a lot of mindlessness, is what I noticed there. But something else that we also have in common too was our body dysmorphia. And I didn't realize that was categorized as a mental illness. But when I thought about my mentality when I was at the height of my struggle with it, it's all I thought about. When we go back to like the definition of the mental illness, the disorders that significantly affect your mood, thinking, and behavior, it's all I thought about was how does my body look? How does, if I eat this, then it might make me bloated and I'm not going to look good in this. And I have this little pudge right here. But meanwhile, I'm getting, DMs and messages and all these things. And people are like body goals and all of these things. I'm saying, how am my body goals when my body looks like this?
Yeah. No, but it's, to your point, it's how, not just how other people see you, but how you feel and how you see yourself, that is such an important part. And dealing with that feedback of, wait, how do I feel right now, right? And then how am I internalizing those moments, those experiences, or those thoughts? And I appreciate you sharing that too, about, the struggles that we've had and how it's impacted both of us, because I know we always say that we're able to have these conversations, and the reason we talk about it is because it's not easy, and also we want to be able to help, even if it's one person, not go through what we went through, or know that you're not alone, or that there's this world where mental health isn't really talked about until it's too late.
Exactly.
And I feel like I'm so grateful. You mentioned mentorship, and that you have a mentee, a little, in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, who, you talk about mentorship. And then I think about one of my mentees who's now in college, but I started mentoring him when he was in the 8th grade. And it was so crazy how similar, although different times, different ages, everything. I'm in a different stage where now I'm becoming a mentor, but my mentee is dealing with similar struggles under the age of 14, dealing with mental health. Unfortunately, his dad, dealt with, was his dad succumbed to suicide. So he was dealing with those thoughts and that mental health struggle. And so I just think about that, and it's like, man, what if I didn't go through what I went through, to be able to have the timing to be a blessing, or to help, or maybe to even just listen to somebody else that needs it. You know what I mean? Which is so important.
Absolutely. And so I really appreciate you sharing your experiences. I think a lot of people are going to be shocked. Yes, by both of our experiences, but when you start talking about teachers locking you in rooms and facing walls and things like that, when you're supposed to be in a kind of community space,
and this is at a church.
But also, can we also in the Black community as well, for both of us? Again, we talked about this in a previous episode. What is church for? Like, church is therapy. That is where you go to have some sort of spiritual therapy. But then we said that it can be therapeutic, but it's not therapy. It's not that professional help that you do need if that's something that you feel like, I'm having a hard time coping.
100%. And to that point too, I know something that was a struggle for me, because in the Black community, like, the church can't do, and for a lot of times in a lot of situations, the church can't do any wrong. And
that's right.
No wrong.
No wrong.
And I know for me as a kid, it was hard, because I would, house of God, but the difference is that, yes, it's the house of God, but everyone that's there are still human. So there's that human element. And I know the struggle for me was that I'm expressing to my parents, like, hey, I didn't do that. Or they're saying I did something at school, I'm getting in trouble, or I'm the scapegoat for some of these situations at school now, because I'm considered as, like, I was, being viewed as a troublemaker, or those things. And because it's a church school, that played into, like, my parents being like, nah, like, the school's got to be right. Like, this is a church, right? They got, they're of the cloth, or like, clearly this is something, it was you. And I'm like, man, I don't have, clearly the school has it out for me, or they're making me out to be the bad guy. I'm telling my parents, and they're like, no, why would the school be wrong? They're saying this, and you feel like you have nowhere to go, or no outlet,
I'm not heard, right?
I'm not heard.
We've talked about this before, where in every relationship, even when you're 14 years old, I want to be seen, heard, and valued.
Correct.
And you're not seeing potentially the signs, right? I'm not being heard, although I'm telling you. And that's why I always just want to challenge parents that no matter at what age, your kids are so much smarter than you think. If you have the conversations with your kids in a way that they also understand, allow them to ask you the tough questions, give them the space to be able to be themselves, but then also tell you when they're struggling. And when they tell you, believe them. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've heard, people that are our age that I'm just having a conversation with, just saying, I told my parents and they didn't believe me. Yeah. And how sad is that? And then also, as the child, you now feel, I have nobody.
Correct.
Or I now need to look somewhere else. And that looking somewhere else can lead to maybe risky behavior, right? Where we can, start getting into that. Now, let's talk about ways to improve your mental health, right? We've talked about what is mental health, how do you know if you're struggling with it, what are the potential signs. We also mentioned some of our own personal struggles, but what are some ways that we can improve our mental health? One, first and foremost, is identifying unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? So that drinking, the smoking, if you're having medicine as well, right? Prescription drugs, overeating, something as simple as that. Or if there's social withdrawals, which that was something that I was mentioning before.
And I just want to pause on the overeating, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but like that can be such a big one. And I'm even thinking about for myself because of the emotions around food.
Yes.
Like, oh man, you're like,
especially in the Black community.
If I'm having a bad day, man, what am I about to eat? If I'm having a good day, man, how am I about to celebrate? What am I about to eat? If it's a birthday or a celebration, what are we about to eat? Right? And so a lot of times that mindset or that fixation can drive you towards those cravings or to those foods being like, I'm finding joy in that.
Food is my friend.
Food is my friend.
Food is making me feel
it's
better.
It's my happy place.
It's my happy place.
Yeah, but it's not that's not the mental health solution to get to the root of maybe like what are you struggling with or what are you maybe running from or running towards right now.
Correct, right? So identifying that too is a main piece because once you can identify that you're struggling, then we can start making some progress in the ways of how to improve that. So the next one is, getting physically active, or what we like to say is our philosophy that we've also trademarked for Coupley Fit, which is SWAN, which stands for sleep, water, activity, and nutrition. And just doing a little bit more in each category per day. If you were able to sleep 5 hours yesterday, try to sleep 5.5 today. Same on the, physical activity. If you were able to get a 10-minute walk in, try to get a 30-minute walk in, right? Just little small changes because nature is going to change the way that you think. It's going to get your endorphins going and it's going to be able to help you cope better when you're also out of your environment.
Yeah. And activity, I would say too, that would be one for me. Like we're in health and wellness and activity is a part of our daily life and our routine. But when I think back to the under 14 and the middle school days, activity and sports is really what saved my life.
Recess.
Because that recess, that playing ball, that's when I was able to let it all, like basically let it all go, 100%. Right? Have fun, like kind of all your cares go into the wind.
Yes.
And I'm not worried about the school stuff. I'm not worried about like I'm just having fun or just playing ball. And I think getting back to that space even as an adult, that might be walking your dog. That might be jumping in a rec league or playing basketball at the park, softball, volleyball, like whatever it is. Or if it's just you individually going out and getting fresh air, but there's so many benefits of the sun shining on your face, just getting moving, which we didn't say workout. You don't have to go run a marathon. No. It can literally be I just went and walked around the block, but that makes such a big impact on your mental health and wellness.
Yes, huge impact. And I'm actually glad that you brought up that sports reference because that, as we're mentioning, that was an outlet for us. Yeah. And so for me playing volleyball, I used to get all of my anger out. Like I couldn't wait to slam a ball. I was trying to hit people in the face. I'm trying to, I just couldn't wait to get on the court and just get all of this anger and anxiety, everything that was feeling so overwhelming at the time, I channeled it there. But interesting enough, something I'm realizing now is like, oh, how do I now kind of almost find a way to rechannel that? Because, not necessarily playing sports in the magnitude that we did before, how do you channel that anger now, right? And that's something else that we can talk about a little bit later.
To your point with channeling that anger, we mentioned like that 8th grade, that middle school. I remember freshman year of high school,
yes,
my first day of football. And again, letting out that aggression, that anger. Sports was how I did it. And so I remember my freshman year of high school, and this is at a top high school in Michigan for football, and they sent me out there with the rest of the freshmen, first day in pads, and they were like, all right, we're doing tackling drills. Kurt, we're gonna line you up here, put another kid. My first tackle, first play, I broke a kid's collarbone, and they were like, we got to send him to the other field. Like, you can't be over here with the freshmen. You got to go over to the JV and the varsity players. But I realized, like, it wasn't just because I was big and strong. It was that aggression and those things that I was dealing with from home and from school.
Right. And you're not trying to hurt anybody. It's just.
Well, no, I had some ill intentions.
You're right.
But it was
it's a gladiator sport.
It was where I was able to let that out. But to your point, when you stop playing sports or you're no longer playing football, And a lot of times
Working
for me,
out.
it is working out. It is me pushing
Strength
myself.
training
Strength
specifically.
training. I try to push myself to that point of like failure, to that point of challenge, so that I reach that point in a controlled environment versus like you're at work and you're, going
Okay.
off the deep end on somebody. And it's like, dang, what happened?
Yes.
It's better to do that in the gym.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Or yeah, whatever space that looks like for you. So the next one is build and maintain meaningful relationships.
Oof. That's so important. I mean,
So
the
important, so
relationships in
powerful.
your circle, they say your circle,
Show me your circle.
show me your circle, I'll show you your future. So if you look at the people you spend, the 5 people you spend the most time around, if they're all successful, you'll be the 5th or the 6th.
Correct.
If they're all not successful, or if they're all heading the wrong direction,
Correct.
guess where they're going to pull you. And
Correct.
so that space and that energy is so important, and knowing who are the people that fill up your tank, almost like a gas tank where you feel more refueled and more
Absolutely.
energized, versus who's draining you and feels like you're on E, or like, man, I just talked to them and I'm on fumes.
Absolutely.
Those are people you got to move away from.
Absolutely. And to your point, I mean, the amount of kids that we've talked to, we do a lot of work with at-risk youth that say, I didn't want to do that, but because I was getting peer pressured, which as we've all been peer pressured, and it's so strong in that moment that you feel like you have to do it, when you realize if you just sit in that uncomfortability for, honestly, I think the stat said 5 to 10 seconds, you'll get over that hump of the uncomfortability and get back into the authenticity of yourself, which is, I don't want to do that. And I actually know that that's not good, or that's a bad behavior, and that's not who I am. I'm not going to do that. How many people have we heard that have gotten into trouble, and some even going to juvie, right? Some even going and literally being behind bars because they made this decision that they didn't want to make because they were around people that were pressuring them in the wrong ways, or made them feel as if, you have to do this in order to be this person.
I appreciate you saying that about the peer pressure in the circle, because I always like to say the saying that, I've got friends that got degrees, PhDs, LLCs, and felonies. And so the difference is a fine line between all of those categories.
Very.
And sometimes it's just who you were hanging out with. I mean, one of my friends was a dynamic athlete. I'm talking about crazy vertical leap. He was one of the only people I've ever seen jump up and can touch the top of the backboard. Not the
Never
rim.
seen that in my life.
I'm not talking about the rim, the top of the backboard. But with the wrong group of people, out and about, late night, someone wants to make some
in
quick,
that middle school age, right?
this is more like early 20s. So like
early 20s, okay.
19, 20 years old with the wrong
Young.
crowd. He's one of the younger guys in the group, but they try to make a quick money type of decision, and he's still serving a 15 to 30-year sentence right now. And I'm talking about, I message him, we talk via JPay and those things, but the reality of that, and now the years and what he's trying to claim back from a couple of decisions where if you would have took that 5 to 10 seconds to think about, wait, the peer pressure, are these long-term friends? It's not worth it.
It's not worth it. It's not worth, 15 years of my life.
Nothing is.
Nothing. And so interesting enough, this goes right into the next tip of change your outlook.
Yeah.
Goes into my next question of change your outlook. So that can look like reframing your life's challenges, right? And saying that this is happening to me, but I have the opportunity to then change the way that I think about this and say, although this is a challenge that's happening right now, I can seek the professional help that I need to get through this challenge. I know that this is not going to last, right? The 5 minutes, the 5 days, the 5 years, right? It's not going to last. And also being able to, in some way, tap into some positivity, right? So I know for you, what you also like to do too is you like to also watch motivational videos on YouTube.
Yeah. And it's a huge one for me. The motivational, David Goggins is a huge one. Shout out to David Goggins. But being able to hear that inspiration, and sometimes when you're feeling down or I'm feeling, because we can have those woe is me moments.
Absolutely.
I don't want
Why
to do
is
it today.
to me?
I don't want to work today. I don't want to work out. But to hear that inspiration and motivation from whoever it is, it could be a movie. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just me watching Gladiator, and I'm like, "Are you not entertained?
Are you not entertained?
I'm ready." Right? And so, finding that inspiration wherever you can.
Absolutely. I know something for me too, when we talk about changing your outlook, I say that I'm a recovering perfectionist. That's something that I need to work on and get better at. And going back to one of my favorite books by Dr. Brene Brown, which is Daring Greatly, she mentions that perfectionism is actually not about being perfect for yourself. It's being perfect for others. And that goes into people pleasing. And if we talk about people pleasing in mental health, when I tell you a lot of struggles I've had have come around trying to please other people, trying to do things for other people and make them feel safe, comfortable, and not realizing that how much of a detriment that was to myself. And lastly, a way to improve your mental health is to develop a stress relief toolkit. I love this. I think this is because we talked about this similarly to physical health too, of having a sort of toolkit that you can access. And so it can be something like meditating, journaling, getting into nature, which we've already mentioned. I know for me, I love herbal tea. That is a ritual that I do every morning. Even this morning, I asked you today, I said, do you want a tea? And I really enjoy the calmness of making the tea and how that brings down my stress levels. And then also, it can also be like getting a massage. And now if you're in a relationship, okay, that's a great way to say, hey, stress relief toolkit, boo, I need you to come and give me a nice massage here. That can be a great way to also help with the stress.
And one of the things that come to my mind, so all of the things that you mentioned that we do, and I'm glad that I'm like, man, make sure I'm checking those things off the list. But also, I like to use a stress ball. Like if I'm in meetings or I'm feeling physical, I'll just have the stress ball. Sometimes it's anxious, being like not like jumping in or like thinking about I'm getting ready to present. I'll have that little stress ball. And I've got them like kind of placed different spots, but it could be something small like that can make a difference.
Yes, and you actually collect those. So
Fun fact.
Yeah, it's fun with the stress balls. Okay, now, we've talked about a plethora of things when it comes to mental health, but now what are some ways to get help if you know that you're struggling? So first and foremost is to talk to someone you trust. That can be family and friends. That can be a religious leader. That can also be a mental health professional, which can be a counselor, a psychiatrist. It can also be specialized mental health centers as well. And when we talk about someone that you can trust, we always talk about, even with business, right? People buy into you because they know, like, and trust you. So find somebody that you feel safe with, first and foremost. And second, that, you don't have to kind of pour your whole heart out in like your first session, right? If it takes you a couple of times to maybe warm up because this is a new topic or a new area that you're expressing to somebody, it's okay if it's multiple meetings. Unless you do need the help, it's critical and you need the help now, then that may be an opportunity to go to like a therapist or a counselor. But just talking to someone that you can trust is a great way to start helping yourself improve your mental health.
Yeah, and if you're wondering who is it that I can trust or who can I share it with, I would say it's somebody that when you've shared something with them in the past, you haven't felt like, dang, I told you that, and now everybody knows.
Everybody knows, or you judged me.
Correct. And so that's a little tip that can help you just be like, okay, this might be the right person, or they didn't judge you, or they didn't tell your business to everybody, or they're just a good listener, or there's someone that you feel like is a confidant or someone that's close. That's always great. But again, these aren't someone that substitutes for a mental health professional. Correct. This is just a way that you're not internalizing.
Yes, because that's where, the suicidal ideations can then come in. I have nobody, I can't talk to anybody.
Nobody cares.
Listening to me, nobody cares. And that's when you can start thinking of those extreme options. And so we just want you to know that you can talk to somebody that you do trust.
And that also you are here for a reason. And
absolutely,
you being here. And I think about that for me, having my mentee, right? And I'm like, man, Duke, if I didn't go through what I went through, how would I be able to maybe help him the way that I can as a mentor now, or even you as a mentor now? So if you're listening and you're in that situation where maybe you're struggling or you're wondering if like, is it worth it to keep going? Definitely keep going, because there's somebody that's going to be looking to you as motivation, as inspiration, or as a reason to not give up.
Absolutely. And quickly, just going back to when you talked about trust and family and friends, religious leaders, if I don't want people to be discouraged if you tell somebody and they don't maybe have the reaction that you're looking for. Continue to reach out to somebody, continue to try to seek that help and don't give up. And that goes right into kind of what you were mentioning is don't give up. There is somebody that does want to help you. It just may take a couple of people to kind of get through and realize, okay, they weren't necessarily the ones that I may trust, or I thought that I could, but now I'm just going to go and talk to somebody else.
And you started off and you gave the example of the weather. And I think for someone or anyone that's going through a storm right now or is in the midst of the rain, know that rainbow is on the other side.
Is.
So you can find a rainbow in the clouds, but you have to keep looking and keep going and not give up.
Absolutely. And so then if you feel like you have someone that you can talk to, that's excellent. But then if you don't, right, you can utilize online resources. The great thing about most of us having a cell phone, which is what we were talking about earlier, right, how do we use our resources? And we can use it by visiting Psychology Today. They have a Find a Therapist tool. So you can find a therapist in your local market, type in your city, your state, or zip code, and it will populate therapists for you. So that's a great opportunity. There's also findtreatment.gov. I do understand with the government right now, especially in America, we are maybe not as trusting, but if we can have at least a service that has some sort of treatment options, it's just an option if that's something that you're interested in. If you have insurance, reach out to your insurance company. I know that's something that we also did as well, was reach out to our insurance company who is in our network, where our insurance will cover most of, our sessions. I think we only had a copay, which was like $25 or something of that nature. And so just feeling very fortunate to be able to have insurance. And if you do, that's an option that your insurance company does have resources for you. And then lastly, I've mentioned this before, is alma.com. So ALMA.com, a great opportunity for you to be able to type in, again, where your location is, race, religion, gender, even to just see if there's somebody that is in your area, or telehealth, right, that you have the access to be able to talk to somebody.
100%.
Lastly, crisis support. We just want to give you a little bit of, I just did some research on, okay, if I'm in the crisis right now, currently, because some of these options are, potentially tomorrow or next week, but what if I'm in it right now? There's something called 988 Suicide and Crisis Hotline. You can call or text 988 or 988lifetime.org for immediate support from a crisis counselor. So if you feel like you're going through it right now, you're struggling, you're having those, suicidal ideations, or it's just really something that has overtaken your complete day, this might be something, a resource for you too. And lastly, if you don't want to necessarily call somebody, there is the crisis text line, which you can text MHA to 741 to connect with a crisis counselor.
Wow. No, there's a lot of powerful resources, and I think it's a reminder that we should not only keep going, but that people are counting on you, and that there is that opportunity to get help, and we're not too big for it, or our problems aren't too big. We do have that opportunity to turn the page, or a new chapter, or, in the weather example, find the rainbow, after the clouds.
Absolutely. So we hope that this helps you to be able to know what mental health is, see if you're struggling with your mental health, and also some resources for you as well. Thank you, Coupley Fit fam. We appreciate you listening to this episode. We hope that this has helped you. And if you know somebody that is struggling with their mental health, please send them this episode. Please like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Please also follow us on social media at Coupley Fit, COUPLEYFIT.